Hi, and welcome to A Better Divorce. I'm Jenny Weeks, and today we're going to talk about the most important aspect of entering into your separation, and that is readiness. Readiness is actually an emotional state, and if you're not ready, you cannot go into your negotiations with clarity. Readiness is about being emotionally ready to take the step of separating from your spouse. Hi, Heather. Thank you for joining us on A Better Divorce. Our goal is to empower couples and individuals who are going through divorce by sharing experience from professionals like you and providing insights so they can have a better divorce. First, Heather, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your counseling service.
Hi, Jenny. Thanks for having me. I'm a Canadian certified counselor. I've been a counselor for over 20 years, dealing with individuals, couples, and families. I also train students of counseling and take intern grad students who are entering the profession. And I've had many, many years of counseling individuals, couples, and families, and hundreds of couples, assisting them to better their marriages and or work through their separation and divorce. When people think about, should I leave, and they're having all this guilt, but really the relationship's not working, they've exhausted all options. I mean, it's just the reality that divorce rates are 38 to 41%-ish in Canada, and it's a reality. It's not like, I don't know how to say that, it's common. And I think sometimes when people feel really guilty, especially if they're the first in a lineage to go through separation and divorce, it's extremely hard. And sometimes people fight to stay beyond what is healthy for themselves and their family. So anyway, I was just thinking about the stat and helping people feel supported.
Part of the reason for this interview is that it's more about, if you're indecisive, I have people that come to see me and then they come to see me a year later and then they come to see me a year later. So, and that's okay. There's no pressure from me. I'm not invested in whether they get divorced or not. What I'm invested in is, are they getting the resources that they need around decision making? And this is the biggest decision that most people make in their life.
Yeah.
It's a bigger decision than buying a house. It's a bigger decision. It's a bigger decision than marriage. You know, the marriage part's easy. The separation part is really hard. You know, and so how does one evaluate for themselves, you know, whether they should start to explore a separation? Maybe that's a step they take. What do you think?
Well, I encourage that. In fact, that's sometimes, that's part of the process of decision making. You need all the information on the table. And so often I'll see people that are staying in a marriage because of some false belief they have. It's not founded in fact. So I really encourage people to see people like yourself, to consult a lawyer, and all of those things don't mean you're ending your marriage. They mean you're attempting to be an informed individual, making a choice. I would always lean on the side of being informed about your decision, because if you feel victimized in the marriage and you're staying for false reasons, that is not going to facilitate a healthy dynamic. That's going to facilitate further resentment and problems in the relationship.
Yeah, well, how important is counseling for couples before they separate?
Well, I'm a counselor, so I'm going to give you a biased answer.
Please do.
I think it's a critical step. It's a critical step in giving your marriage a chance and getting clear about what is happening and what do you really want, and having each party weigh in. About their level of commitment and their willingness to invest, and also identifying if there's significant barriers to healthy functioning in the marriage, because there may be, like what I mentioned before, domestic violence, addiction, infidelity. Like, if those barriers are present, you need to be able to identify them and then decide, is somebody willing to do something about that? potential toxin to the relationship to help the relationship? Maybe not.
I think that leads into some of the decision-making guidelines for people when they're going through, which is, addressing what are the problems in the marriage. Are they fixable?
Yeah.
Do both parties want to be there? And I from my experience, a lot of the couples that I see going through a separation, there's one party that still wants in the marriage, and there's one party that doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you move forward when you're both on totally different pages?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that's another thing coming into couples counseling, because it helps you identify that. And if that is in fact the case, it's a place where you can process and move through that. Because couples counseling and successful marriages require two participants, two active, engaged members. If you only have one, that relationship is not going to thrive, period. And is it okay to be with someone, A, you don't want to be with? Is it okay to be with someone, B, that doesn't want to be with you? How healthy can that be for yourself, and how healthy can that be as a role model to the children if you have children?
You come back to the piece of children, and I just got off another interview, and it sounds to me like if couples can focus on that relationship, the relationship with the family and the children, that can give them a lot of guidance around their decision making.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think it can be the opposite, which is the concept of we're going to stay together for the children.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you can just talk a little bit about is it better to stay together for the children, or is it not? And that is a big block for people, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very complex, and we certainly see a lot of couples or individuals perhaps, who are staying for the children in their mind because it's an idea that they have. But when they actually tease through the reality of the kids and what the kids may be exposed to, and what they may be modeling to the children, and what they want their children to learn about love and long-term relationships, may be a very different story. So there might be an idea about staying in the relationship with the children, but then when that's further investigated, sometimes that argument slowly crumbles, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. So it sounds to me like a lot of the time that you spend is really digging deep into that relationship and helping people uncover, the issues that they have that may or may not even be related to their marriage.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And not all the time, but some of the times people are bringing issues from the time that they were raised and the modeling that they received. And they are making different decisions for what they want to offer their children, but they may perhaps be repeating a pattern that they don't want to repeat. So being awake about their decisions and their logic is really important, so those individuals can feel empowered about their choice to stay or not to stay.
And is the grass greener on the other side?
Always.
I don't know. I'm in a second marriage, and I think that I followed myself into the second marriage.
Yeah. Well, I always, meaning, well, there's always another side. No matter where you are, there's always the other side. So, but I think what's more important is how much health and wellness and joy can you establish in your current situation with your current partner? What is possible? What is doable? Who is willing? Who is not, in order to do that? And if you've exhausted those options and you come up with, I'm not with a person who I can create my happiness with for whatever the reason might be, that's when you're looking at least reviewing the next set of possibilities and options.
And at that, like, do trial separations help? Is that a place to go when you're, what have you seen? Do you recommend that? And
Yeah.
what does that look like for people?
That's a good question. There are situations where trial separations are very helpful. If both parties are committed to the marriage and one or both parties feels that they need the space to reflect on the marriage, and through the separation, they're guided with a third party and have an agreement about the conditions of the separation that are in line with helping the relationship succeed. Um, there's also situations where people do a trial separation that might be that one party's not as interested, and they may not have agreements, and they may not keep agreements when the separation occurs because they're actually looking for a way out. So it's tricky, and I think clear agreements are number one for separations. Another reason why people do a trial separation is because they can't actually bring down the volatility in the dynamic. They don't know how to deactivate their level of volatility and conflict. And so they might do a trial separation in the interest of the overall family and minimizing the exposure of conflict with their children.
Like taking a time out almost.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
because it can just be so escalating.
Yeah, exactly. However, best case scenario, you have a counselor involved who's helping you design the agreement. Your partner is in agreement, and you know the timeline of the separation and the conditions of it. And it's all been discussed ahead of time. That's the best case scenario.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I understand how important it is to have agreements in place because, and this is sort of more on another note, but when you do some kind of a trial separation, you can get caught up in the terms as you go down further into your separation. It can kind of come back in some ways if you're not clear about why you're doing it, right? Like you might want to continue sharing your money. You might want to continue. You don't want that to form part of your real separation, for example, possibly. And just another piece is that I want to talk about readiness for couples and pace. And maybe you can touch on from your experience when you have couples where one couple is quite content in a marriage and another couple is not content in a marriage, and one has a sense of urgency around moving on, and the other doesn't, and how that plays out when they are moving towards a separation, and how can that couple support each other almost in that area?
So are you suggesting that one party has already decided they want to leave the marriage?
Yeah, or it's just that the one party may take years to decide to even comprehend that their marriage is ending.
Mm-hmm.
And so how does one move forward if one doesn't? And the other piece I see is that when that happens, it really plays into the negotiation as they're moving towards more legal agreements. So how do you talk to that point in a separation when one is much more ready than another? How do you counsel around that to both parties?
That's a great question. That's a great question. Well, there's always one person a step or 10 steps ahead of another. There's almost always a disparity in somebody's readiness to separate. And we can't always wait for both parties to be in full agreement if one person's already left the marriage, even perhaps many, many years earlier. So part of it is ensuring that the person who's not ready to let go has adequate support, because this is something that is it is happening. And so they may need additional support to grasp that it's happening and to help them digest this new reality that's occurring for them. Because if someone has fully decided to leave, the marriage has ended at some level. Now the next step is a matter of manifesting it in the physical world.
Yeah, I've seen inequities in separation agreements as a result of different readiness.
Oh yeah.
Some right. And so that's really what I'm trying to touch on is I think our listeners need to understand how important it is that both parties are supported by counseling
Mhm.
so that as they go through this, whether you're the person who is extremely ready and saying, look, I don't care, I'll give them the house because I just want out, or you're the person who is not really even believing it's happening and is almost ignorant in a way as they go through their negotiation, and keeping in mind that the goal is that the outcome for both parties is as good as it can possibly be.
Right. Okay.
Right. You don't want inequities in an agreement where you have children.
Mhm. So I understand what you're asking more completely now. And I think from my perspective, both parties have to be fully informed and have support people in place, people like yourself to help review the finances for the family and to have quality legal counsel, preferably those which are in good communication with one another, preferably not litigators. Avoid at all costs that option to keep costs down and streamline the process. But yeah, ensuring that each party has the appropriate supports in place so that they are adequately advocated for, with all the information that they need to have a fair and equitable separation.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really great information. Um, I, uh, I want to talk a little bit about what you can accomplish before you separate in a counseling office as well. And, how important maybe the end of your marriage counseling as you move, or as one person might sit there and say, I'm done. How important those conversations would be, and what kinds of conversations you think couples should have about the end of their marriage before they start seeking legal counsel.
Mhm. Well, it's very helpful if both parties are willing for couples to identify their responsibility for the end, their contribution to the ending of the relationship. For each party to take responsibility for their part in closure. In addition, talking through absolutely a draft separation agreement. That's another piece, and how they want things to go. Negotiating that, the counselor can be helpful in that process. And again, ensuring that they're seeing outside support services, including people like yourself for the financial piece. And knowing, I mean, all of that is important to happen before the separation occurs. All of
Yeah,
that.
I would very much agree with that. I think sometimes that's the step that can get missed.
That's a big step to miss, because
Yeah.
ultimately, particularly when there's children involved, although the couple, for example, have decided to separate it, haven't been able to successfully unravel the negative dynamic that that ended up ending their relationship, we really don't want them to continue to reenact that while they're parenting their children. So helping them identifying that and find other ways of relating only benefits the children. And having clear agreements where people don't feel defensive or get equally volatile. These are all things that kids can be exposed to, whether they overhear a phone conversation or where they children are looking with eagle eyes to find out how everybody is. So if somebody is really not okay because of higher conflict or a lack of resolution, the children are looking for that. They're looking to their parents to see, is everything okay? Because the best message a parent can give through separation is, this is what's going on. Well, that's another thing to discuss, how to discuss with the kids, when to talk to the kids, all that stuff before the separation happens. But we want
Well,
parents to be confident about their agreement. We want them to feel good about, as good as they can, about what's happening, that their voice is equally considered in the agreement moving forward before they actually move.
Yeah, so that is a really clear, you've repeated something another counselor repeated, which is, I wish that I could have had 2 sessions to
Mhm.
talk about how to talk to the children
Oh,
before getting separated. So you really identified that as one of those pieces that's worth coming to see a counselor, just to understand how to talk to the children about what's happening and how important that is, because it sets up a shared value that the couple has moving forward, which is, we want a positive outcome. We want a better divorce because of our children. It's the unifying factor to begin with.
absolutely. And for some couples, they'll decide, okay, so we weren't able to rescue this marriage. We weren't able to do that well together, but let's do the separation together really well. Let's have this be the least possibly damaging experience it can be for our kids. And let's get consultation about how to do that effectively for our children.
What communication tool do you recommend to keep the conflict lower, and for them to have some success as they start on their separation?
Mhm. Yeah, so I do a lot of work with that with families, in fact, because when couples ultimately end up with a toxic pattern of relating, even if the marriage ends, that toxic pattern will persist and continue, and the children can still be exposed to it, even though the separations occurred. So having a very clear separation agreement, which includes as much detail as possible such that there aren't as many questions or queries to ask post separation, helps bring down the volume of communication that needs to occur. Ultimately, that is less stressful for the couple, and it's less stressful then in turn for the children. So every couple's different. So when there's high volatility, we really want to minimize communication and minimize any exposure the children might have to that volatility or to, yeah. And I think that the clearer the separation agreement is, the easier it is to do that. So all this preliminary work before the separation needs to be in place to avoid what you're talking about, which is more volatility and the kids being exposed to more of that dynamic post the actual physical separation.
Yeah, the other thing that I the other knowledge or experience that I want people to know about, that you just don't know until you're separated, is that when you have children, you're still co-parenting, and you're co-parenting for a lifetime. So maybe you can touch on how important that foundational relationship with your ex-spouse is, and why you need to invest in it through your separation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great and a very complex question, because there's some situations if volatility is uncontrollable, almost over the top, and ultimately the couple needs to minimize communication. Sometimes that's in the best interest of the kids. If the individuals are not able to, for whatever reason, control the conflict and the level of volatility, it's better to have minimal communication and stick as closely to the separation agreement as possible. So, in an ideal world, the parents would be talking more about the kids and what's going on. And sometimes that comes later. Sometimes it's the first year that the communication dial's got to be turned way down while things are more sensitive and volatile. And then gradually that can be reintroduced. But what I see more often than not is parents' attachment to communicating more, and it's ineffective, and actually overexposing the kids. So my perspective would be evaluate the quality of engagement you can have, and if it's fairly healthy and conflict somewhat free or minimal conflict, that's fine. If it's not, then take a new tact, change it up with guidance and support.
I hear you talking a lot about how important it is to continue to have communication support all through your separation and post-separation. Do you do that? Do you do a lot of support with families after post around communication?
Oh, absolutely. Because as you know, divorce and separation takes a little time. So, and particularly the first year when you're going through all the milestones like birthdays and Christmases and family celebrations and all the change is happening in that first year, that's the most imperative time to have the support. And post the first year, by then you've been through the hardest part and you know how things work generally. Often people have draft separation agreements and they reassess them once a year as well. Sometimes if they want to renegotiate something or change something and they want a third party involved, we can also help at that point.
I want to touch on another issue that I'm fairly passionate about, which is interest-based negotiation versus positional. And you know, in talking about lowering conflict and how important that is in communication, and in thinking about that, when clients are choosing the route of litigation, how damaging can that be on a future relationship with your ex-spouse?
You might know some of the answer to that based on your experience with couples. Yeah, I mean, with the couples that we work with, we advise they begin with a collaborative divorce process, sometimes not signing on to that, depending on the level of conflict and complexity, but still using a collaborative process, which means not going for litigation. Ultimately, we know where BC family law stands with respect to rights of each individual parent and the children and all of those pieces of the domestic equation. There's no giant surprises that are going to occur. If you want to spend a lot of money and a lot of time and increase everybody's stress level, litigation is going to bring you that. I don't know really necessarily what else it might bring you. That's the thing. So it could be a long route to getting to the place you may get to anyway, even if you didn't go through the litigious litigating route. Did that make sense?
Yeah, well, my philosophy, which I have a video on, is that or approach is that when someone's going into a separation, they need to understand that they're dividing their income, they're dividing their time with their children, they're dividing their assets. So you can't go in and say I'm taking because you're dividing.
That's right.
Right. And so litigation, it has more of a I can get more approach. But I want you to repeat what you said, which is that the family law, we're not lawyers, but that the law actually supports equality, really. And so the conflict that you get out of one approach isn't necessarily going to change your physical outcome, but it might change your emotional outcome.
Your financial outcome. And yeah, definitely. I think that if you're informed about where BC law's position, and your partner is also informed about that position, and you also understand that whatever process you take, you're probably going to end up pretty darn close to that middle ground. Why not take the route that's less stressful, less costly, potentially faster, in the interest of decreasing family stress through the most stressful experience of your life?
Yes, very, very true. It is. It's a death of a family, really.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which goes on to the importance of supporting your children, because it's it's the first big stressor that happens for them.
Yeah, so being informed about how to speak to your kids, given their age, when to speak to your kids, and how to include aspects of parenting in the separation agreement beyond timing, but also things like, when do you want to introduce a new partner to your children? Do you and your spouse want to agree on that, given what's in the interest of your kids? So there's all kinds of factors around parenting that can help protect your children from additional and further and unnecessary distress.
Wow, thank you. You've been extremely helpful today, Heather. I think that the topic of, readiness and ending a marriage is such a difficult one, and I think you've given a lot of insight into some of the considerations and parameters and insights. It's been wonderful. Do you have any messages that you want to share with our audience? Any tips or just experience that you have that you want to leave with them before we end our interview?
Well, firstly, I think that even by watching this video, you're doing the right thing to be querying and finding information about yourself and your relationship and your family. I always want to empower our clients to be as informed as possible so that they are making decisions from an informed place. So I just want to say that that's probably one of the most important things. Be informed, and communicate with your partner. Talk to your partner about your concerns. Get help. We know that the sooner a couple gets help when they identify a problem in their relationship, there's less years of potential damage to the trust and the attachment in the relationship. Yeah, so I hope that's helpful, Jenny.
That's extremely helpful. We might be back for more interviews with you, Heather. And I love your point that, the more that you can discover before you, hire a lawyer, start really going down that path, the more informed you are and the more on the same page you and your partner are, the better off you are. So if nothing else, that's a great piece to take away. Thank you so much for your time today. And, if you enjoyed this video, please hit subscribe and join our YouTube channel. And we'll see you next week with another interview on a better divorce.